So we were in the throes of talking about square footage when we left last night. So let's start there tonight. Go back and refresh where we left off. Got a few more things to say. I got something I want to point out to you guys. Make sure you guys see it's in your textbook that is helpful, not just for your exam, but for real life as well. So first, when it comes to total living criteria or heat of living criteria or total heat of living criteria, they can call it whatever they want to. There are three requirements. There are three things that we have to have in order for me to count it as total heated square footage. And we have to have all three of them. So like, for example, an unfinished basement. I can advertise the square footage of an unfinished basement. I can say there's an unfinished basement in this house of X amount of square feet, but I cannot include that unfinished basement in the heated living area criteria. Okay, so if I want to count it in the total heated living criteria, I'm going to, I got a video actually, if I forget, if somebody can remind me, I'm making myself right now on my hand, but I got a video on measuring. I'll give you guys the link before we leave tonight. There's more in the video than what you need to know for your test, but I still think the video does a good idea of kind of showing you measuring and what to start, how to start. Remember we said last night too that it's just one of those things, either you have to go out and do it or you'll have to pay somebody to do it. And if you're paying somebody to do it, they need to have more experience than you. Don't send the college student in your neighborhood out to measure, throwing $20 and say, here you go. Because ultimately, no matter what you advertise that square footage, you are responsible for it. The broker is liable for improperly advertising square footage. So again, either you learn how to do it by practice, you go shadow somebody. You can go out when you affiliate with your firms, you could go with a seasoned agent in your office and you can help them measure. Like you get to hold the dummy end of the measuring stick and kind of, help them. And then when you go out and measure your own house, of course, you're going to, may ask for some help, may have your broker in charge come out with you. So this is where we left last night. I think the last thing we said was talking about red flags. And for example, if this room was advertised as 400, or what did we say? It was 400 square feet and it was advertised as 900. Even as dimensionally challenged as I am, I should still be able to stand here and say, this is not 900 square feet. Now, the difference in 400 square feet and 420 square feet, come on, nobody can eyeball that. But if at any time you have a question go up, or more importantly, your buyer has a question go up, are you sure this is 500 square feet or whatever? The best thing to do is go out and verify it, measure behind and verify it. Any questions on anything? Again, I'm not quite done with square feet yet, but any questions so far? One thing that is more important to appraisers than me and you, but still something we need to be aware of. There's different levels of grade, if you will. Above grade property, the living area doesn't have dirt touching it. Below grade is a basement property. It does have dirt. If any one of its sides is in the dirt, then it's considered below grade. So, it's not our responsibility to tell you if it's above grade or below grade, but the reason we need to understand is because the appraiser is going to put more value on above grade than they are on below grade. So the basement, while it's still very important, great storage, family room, bonus room, etc., there is value to the below grade, but our understanding is that the appraiser is going to put more value on above grade. So below grade, above grade. So let's look. Let's turn, if you will, in your books.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Are you referring to the property as like the whole property is below grade, or just like the basement?
Just if any part of it.
Okay, so if any part of it
Any
is
side.
below grade, the whole property is below grade. Gotcha.
Yep. Yep. So if you just have like the back end is under the ground, but you know, it's on a slope, right? So if any part of it is touching that dirt, touching earth, then it's going to be considered below grade. So hold your place in the book. We're going to come right back to this. Hold your place in the book and turn with me, if you will, to Appendix C on page 743. Appendix C, 743. Let's call Appendix C your measuring Bible. When you affiliate with your firm, you'll probably get a hard copy of this. The Real Estate Commission produces a pamphlet. We just put it in the book for you. So it's the same thing. If you see the fancy, it's like yellow with a red measuring tape on it. Or we just put it in Appendix C as your textbook. Over on page 744, the gray box on the left, that's telling you more about above grade and below grade, a little bit more information. There's our 3 criteria on 744, living area criteria, heated, finished, and directly accessible. And then over on 745 talks about some other things like attics, basements, bay windows, that kind of thing. So, you know, every house is different. And they're all going to have some kind, not every house is like a perfect square, right? There's differences to them. So you're going to run into various things, again, which is why it's advised that you spend time measuring with somebody before you go out and try it on your own. For your tests, you guys need to just worry about 744 and 745. So make a note, dog ear it. And this video that I'm going to give you guys after class, it covers a lot of this stuff too. The rest of this is good stuff. Don't get me wrong, it's good stuff. But you don't necessarily need to worry about it until you get your license. So, you know, you can read what you want, but look for, if you will, on page 750 and 751. There is a floor plan and measuring for measuring a 1-story with a basement and a carport. So it's a little exercise. Think of this section as like a workbook, if you will. So it's like an exercise on measuring a 1-story with a basement. 752 is a 2-story with an open foyer. 754 is a 2-story with a bonus room. 756 is a split foyer. You guys see what we're doing here? So it's just kind of a little workbook of various styles. Now, Unit 16, we're going to talk about some basic residential construction, and we'll talk a little bit about architectural styles. So we'll talk about split level, that kind of thing. But again, there's a condo on page 762. So that just kind of gives you, a workbook to kind of work through some of those floor plans. Again, you know, you're welcome to look at it now, but I want to try to help keep you guys focused on your test as well. Speaking of condo, there's a reason why I said that. I'm going to go back for 1 second. I need to make sure I get this in. The rule of thumb with a condo, when you're measuring a condo, let's talk about just some basic rule of thumbs with different types of properties. Remember we said condo owners own from paint to paint. They own from sheetrock to sheetrock. So if you're measuring a condo, you're going to measure the inside walls. So you're going to go inside. When you're looking at a wall is either exterior or interior. An exterior wall on the other side is the outside. An interior wall on the other side is inside. So maybe you have a wall separating rooms. That would be an interior wall. An exterior wall on the other side, you're outside. So in a condo, to measure a condo, you're going to measure your exterior walls, right? You're going to get the paint to paint. Typically, when you measure anything other than a condo, I'm going to try to draw, not really, but here's our house. When you measure anything other than a condo, you measure outside. So you go outside the property and measure, or excuse me, outside the house and measure corner to corner to corner to corner. You work your way around the house. And that's where like one of those 100-foot cloth measuring tapes would come in handy. When you're outside measuring houses, you're going to be trampling through bushes and shrubbery and flowers and plants. So my free advice for you today is to invest in some rubber boots, because things slither and crawl back there. So get you some good rubber boots before you start go playing in bushes and shrubs, then pay somebody. These are your choices. You have choices. Y'all start to get all set with me. You have choices. But you measure from the outside, and then you go inside and deduct anything that doesn't qualify. So for example, you measure the entire outside and get the entire square footage, and then you would go inside and measure the garage and deduct that square footage to get the total heated living square footage. You see what we're doing? If you have places to measure that you can't get to it in the outside, let's say, for example, you have a 2-story home, but the second story is bigger than the first story. I can come out on the ground and I can measure this part, right? But I can't safely measure the second story. So if you can't get to the outside to measure it, that's when you go inside, you measure the exterior walls, and then you add 6 inches. So you go inside, you measure exterior wall, and you add 6 inches, except for condos. Condos, you don't add 6 inches, because condo owners only own from paint to paint, from sheetrock to sheetrock. Questions on measuring? Again, this video that I'm going to give you guys after class to watch, it's only like 7 or 8 minutes, but if you want, the Winston-Salem Board of Realtors partnered with Piedmont Federal Bank, and they put together a 5-part series on measuring. So, and it's really interesting. So the first is kind of the summary, the overall, and that's what I'm going to give you guys the link for tonight. But once you get to that first, like the second video is specifically measuring a ranch. The third is specifically measuring a 2-story. So it goes into specifically measuring different styles, different types. So I'll make sure I get you guys that video after class so you can watch it at your own time. So this picture is above grade. The ground is here. Yeah, the ground is right there. It's just that the 2-story is bigger than the second story is bigger than the first story. Open staircases. Staircases get tricky. With staircases, it depends. So the video is going to touch on the staircase, but kind of a general rule of thumb when we're measuring, if you can walk on it, you can measure it. So staircases almost count twice, because if you have stairs, okay, there's our staircase. And then I have like the second floor here, right? And I have the first floor here. If in your mind, you could put a little hinge on the staircases, you would have space here, right? If you could bring up the stairs, you would have space here to measure, and you would have space here. So this area would count, and this area would count as well. Again, stairs get tricky because you got different types of stairs, right? What if you have an open foyer, for example? So fun things for you guys to look forward to. And I think it talks about stairs in your book. And I think talks about stairs in the little video as well. Oh, the picture in the PowerPoint. I thought you were talking about my artistic ability. Yes, the picture in the PowerPoint, sorry. The picture in the PowerPoint, this down here is below grade. If you can see my mouse, this down here would be considered below grade because this side, and it looks like that back side touches earth. It's in earth. This up here would be our above grade. Sorry about that. I was caught up in my moment.
Sorry, that confused me a little bit. Because that kind of goes to the question I asked you a second ago. So would the whole property be considered below grade?
No, just this down here.
So it's just part of the property then. Okay, that's all.
Right. That's right. That's right. This up here where the garage is, this floor, that would be the above grade. Unfinished attics that can be later upgraded. If it is unfinished, I can't count it. Once you finish it, then I can count it as total heated square footage. And remember, I think it was Unit 5 we talked about unpermitted space. And remember, I can count unpermitted space as heated living areas, as heated living square foot. I can count it, but I have to disclose the finished attic was not permitted. So as long as the finished attic is adequately heated, finished, and is directly accessible, I can count it, but I have to disclose attic was not permitted. Finished basement was not permitted. I saw a listing in MLS today, and it kind of intrigued my interest. And they added on a laundry room, and the agent only remarks, it said, or maybe the public remarks, I don't know, but it said permitted laundry room, da 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 da. So they were telling us this laundry room, this added on room was permitted, so it was okay. Closets are considered, yeah, we'll count closets. That's getting to, like closets and utility rooms, maybe with your hot water heater, stuff like that. They're not going to get that picky, I guess is a good word. So closets are counted as heated living area criteria as long as it meets this criteria. Questions? Square footage? Appendix C. Again, just those first couple pages, just worry about those for now.
I have a question.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So when we're determining the square footage, whether the property has above or below grade, do we have to break it up on the sheet like that? It's below grade, it's still included in the square footage of the home, right?
If it's finished, adequately heated, and directly accessible. This is more for the appraiser to worry about because they're the ones that determine value. But you and I need to know, ooh, you got a basement, you got, a level that touches earth that would be considered below grade. So it's not going to have the value that the above grade does. So again, we're not expected, we do not report this is above grade or below grade, but we need to know the difference because the appraiser is going to care.
Got it. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. So remember, we're talking about working with sellers. And when we're talking about determining square footage, and again, this is worth repeating because make sure we're good. Square footage is not a material fact, and the Real Estate Commission does not consider square footage a material fact. But if we report it, we're liable for it. I can't speak for other MLSs, but I know the Triad MLS square footage is a required field. So you're reporting it. If you're in the Triad MLS, you're reporting it. I don't know about Triangle or Charlotte or wherever else you might be. And when we're working with sellers, helping, finding that square footage, as part of our jobs as the listing agent before getting the property ready to list it, getting the property ready to put it on the market. And another big thing we're doing with the sellers to help them get ready to put it on the market is to help them determine listing price. And we're not just going to blurt a number out. We're not just going to pull a number out of the clear blue sky and say, this is what you should list your home for. We're going to do some research. Specifically, we're going to do a comparative market analysis, also known as a CMA. A CMA looks at recently sold properties nearby. Basically, what a CMA is saying is, in this neighborhood, within the past 6 months, what were buyers willing to pay for their property, for their home? And based on recently sold properties nearby, it can help me determine the probable sales price for the property that I want to list. We're going to talk a lot. Unit 17 is our appraisers unit. So in Unit 17, we're going to put on our appraiser's hat, but we're also going to talk more about our CMAs there. I'll look at some math with some CMA in Unit 17. And as we said yesterday, when we were looking at our listing agreement, before the seller signs the listing agreement, we have to come up with an agreement on the listing price. So we do the CMA. We tell the seller, I think this is your probable sales price. You know, depending on the market, we're going to probably put it on the market for a little bit more than the probable sales price. What we're saying is, based on my research, this is what I think a buyer is willing to pay for this property. So let's put it on for a little bit more. Give us some wiggle room for negotiation. How much more? I mean, it depends on the market. Right now, we could put it on $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 more if we wanted to. Diane, dust is in Unit 17. We'll talk about that then. Okay. So we're helping the sellers find a probable sales price, so we know what to list it for. So we know what to list their property for. Another thing, this isn't on your test, but just kind of FYI, because I think it will be on your test soon, because this is something that's gaining in popularity. There's something we're using now called absorption rate pricing. And absorption rate pricing helps me determine how many average days on the market. How long are homes sitting on the market before they sell? So when we're working with this seller with this listing agreement, we're doing the CMA to help us determine the listing price, but we're also doing this absorption rate pricing to help us determine the average days on market. Remember last night we were talking about the listing agreement. We had to have an expiration date. And I said, if the average days on market in this area is 3 months, if it takes 3 months on average to get it under contract, don't take a listing agreement for 2 months or a month and a half, right? If the average days on market before it goes under contract is, 6 months, then don't take a listing agreement for 3 months. How do we determine that average days on market? That's where you guys, when you join your firms, I promise you will see absorption rate pricing. I wouldn't be surprised if this doesn't show up in pre-licensing within the next couple of years. You guys will be long gone and off doing your thing. But for me, I know this will come up because a lot of times we're relying on this just as heavily as a CMA. One duty that we have to our client, seller or buyer, we have to avoid conflicts of interest. And when it comes to me selling a property or listing a property that I own, I am the owner on record. I am the listing agent. If I am the owner on record and the listing agent, I cannot represent the buyer. Because what does Old Car say? Old Car says I have my client's best interest even above my own sometimes. So if I'm the listing agent, do I have the buyer's best interest? If I'm the owner, I can try to tell you I do, but ultimately at the end of the day, who do I care about? I care about Julie. I care about how much money Julie's going to make. So that makes sense, doesn't it? It's only fair to the buyer. I could do my own open house. And if a buyer's interested, I could say, great, here's the name and number of one of my coworkers. Reach out to them. They can help you. So somebody else in my office can represent, but I can't. The exception to this rule is if it's a commercial property and my ownership interest is less than 25%. So if I have an ownership interest in a commercial property of less than 25% and I'm the listing agent, I can represent the buyer as long as, full disclosure, I'm the owner, I'm the agent, let the buyer know that situation. How our listing agreements terminate. We talked about this back in Unit 7. Basic agency agreement termination. Our listing contract, our listing agreements terminate the same way. So you guys already have this. Let's just get them all to closing. Isn't that ideal? In a perfect world, we're going to sell them all. We're not in a perfect world. If they expire without selling, that's going to terminate mutual agreement. Remember, you can't fire the seller because it's not your seller. Your broker in charge would have to fire the seller. If either party breaches, remember we looked at our listing agreement, both parties have duties and obligations to each other. And if either party doesn't fulfill their duty or obligation, then they are in breach. Operation of law, destruction of property, and death or incapacity of either party. Keeping in mind, the agreement is between the firm and the seller. So if the listing agent passes away, the show goes on. If the listing agent passes away, it's still an active listing because it's the firm's listing. If the firm shuts its doors, then the firm has died, and that would terminate the listing agreement. Also working with sellers, we got some seller disclosures. So let's talk about some seller disclosures. There's certain information that the sellers have to complete the forms. They don't have to disclose anything, which is what makes these interesting. The most common seller disclosure is the Residential Property Owners Association Disclosure Statement. Let's just call that RPODS. So much easier to say. See why we give everything an acronym? That's a lot to say. So the RPODS, we'll know it going forward. The RPODS is a seller disclosure. It's required on most residential sellers. What's interesting about this form is it's a mandatory form with optional disclosure. They have to complete it. They have to provide it to the buyer, but they don't have to disclose anything. Who remembers what caveat emptor means? Caveat emptor.
Buyer beware.
Buyer beware. And because we are a caveat emptor, the seller is not required to disclose anything. So they have the option. They have to complete the form, but they have the option of what they want to disclose. This form is required, most residential, typically most 1 to 4 unit dwellings. So if you have a single family home, a duplex, a quadplex, it would be required. There are some exemptions. The biggest exemption to this form is new construction. Never before lived in dwelling is not required because nobody's lived in it. They can't attest to the condition of it. This is a seller's disclosure, which means it's the seller's responsibility to complete. I cannot complete this for the seller. Please make sure you make a note of this. I cannot complete this for the seller. I can provide them with the form. I can help them. I can walk them through. I can explain it to them, but I can't tell them how to fill it out. There's a pretty good chance I've never lived in this house. So while I can guide them and help them, I cannot fill it out for them. So we assist, but it's the seller's responsibility to complete. And if anything on the condition of the property changes while we have it listed, maybe something was broke and the seller fixed it. Maybe something was working just fine and then it broke. We need to keep the R codes accurate throughout the listing. We're going to look at that form in just a second. So if anything in the condition of the property changed, then we need to update the R codes and keep it active throughout the listing agreement. I'll tell you guys, I don't know if the real estate commission is on some kind of rampage or what, but the disciplinary action and the e-bulletins that we looked at, I'm going to say about 6 or 7 months out of last year, 2021, there was a disciplinary action because of this right here. Agents failing to keep in the RPODs up to date. I saw that more last year than I thought I would ever see. It was the common theme last year. So again, the seller completes it, it's working just fine, and then it breaks, update the RPODs. Seller completes it and it's not working, and then they fix it, update the RPODs. The buyer is to receive the RPODs no later than presenting the offer. In practice, in a real world situation, most of the times these are included in MLS attachments just for us members to see. You guys wouldn't see these on Zillow. So when my buyer wants to see 123 Main Street, and I look it up in MLS, I have this attached that we can look at it. We have the seller disclosures, we can look at it before we ever go view the property. If it's not available then we need to get it in the buyer. We need to assist to get it in the buyer's hands. And the reason, especially as listing agents, the reason that we need to get this in our buyer's hand is because failure for the buyer to receive it gives them the right to cancel. So if we go under contract and they have not seen this yet, they have the right to terminate their contract, take back any of their deposits. So the rule just says whichever occurs first, end of the 3rd day following buyer's receipt or end of the 3rd day following the contract date. If occupancy happens before the settlement date, that would be before we go under contract. So maybe you have a tenant already living there, for example. The tenant probably knows more about the property than the landlord, don't they? Because they're the ones actually living there. So failure to provide at the buyer, the big thing to note on this screen, gives the buyer the right to cancel. So as the listing agent, you don't want to give the buyer an out, right? Once you get a buyer for your seller under contract, you want to keep them. So this is, again, why it's part of our duties. Please understand too, for sale by owners are not exempt from this. So if you're a buyer's agent and your buyer's interested in a for sale by owner, it's our job to help to get that form to the for sale by owner, to facilitate that and get that in our buyer's hands. So for sale by owners are not exempt. Remember, you guys, regardless of how the seller completes the form, we have a duty to disclose material facts. The seller can say no representation on the whole form. That's their right, caveat emptor. You and I have to follow license law and commission rule. License law and commission rule says I have to disclose all material facts. And then, as we said, all agents in the transaction we need to get this to the buyer. If it's a for sale by owner, if they don't have it, provide them with a blank copy so they can fill it out. So the RPODs is one of our disclosures. The other disclosure is the MOG, also known as the mineral and oil and gas rights. Who remembers Unit 2? We're talking about severing subsurface rights, severing rights to oils, minerals, and gases. If the seller has severed their subsurface rights, or if they plan to sever their subsurface rights, they have to disclose that. New construction is not exempt from the MOG. New construction has to have this form. The story goes, this form that we're getting ready to look, this MOG isn't that old. We just got it in like, I think it was about 2015, something like that. So that form's not that old. The story goes, I don't know if it's true or not, but it's the story I heard behind it. There was a builder in Texas, bought a whole bunch of land, subdivided it, and then sold the property. This is Texas. The builder severed the oil. The builder purchased the rights to the oil and did not disclose that to all those buyers on that property that he bought. So guy was in his backyard one day digging for something, and lo and behold, struck oil. The owner said, "Sweet." And the builder said, "Ha, ha, 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 that's mine. Pay up." There's this huge lawsuit. Da, 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 da. Today we have a form if the seller severs or intends to sever. So let's go look at these forms. I got both of these in Learn, Test, Pass for you. So if we look in the Unit 8 material of Learn, Test, Pass, the RPODs, it starts with instructions to property owners, explains to the owners their right not to disclose. You don't have to disclose. This isn't your, this isn't caveat emptor. You don't have to. It tells the sellers their options. It says, we're going to ask you a series of questions about the property in which you can respond one of three ways. You can say yes, you can say no, or you can say no representation. If you say yes or no, you can't lie. You cannot lie. The seller, I should say, cannot lie. So if something's not working and the seller doesn't want to disclose that, then they need to click no representation. They need to check no representation. They cannot lie. Here's a note to buyer that talks about their right to cancel if they have not received this form. Buyer and seller sign, owner signature and buyer signature. And then the rest of it is the disclosure. So you can see, and I'll let you guys look at this, but you can see there's a series, just about anything with the property, we're asking the seller. Is there a problem with the foundation, slab, fireplace, floors, etc.? Yes, no, no representation. Is there a leak with the roof? Yes, no, no representation. And it goes on and on. What are the pipes made out of? Copper, galvanized, plastic, polybutylene? Yes, or that would just be no rep. So it's just an opportunity for the seller to go through. And again, here's about septic system. How many bedrooms are allowed per your septic system? And once we go through, then it says, if you answer yes to any of the above, please explain. So if something is broke or leaking or not working properly or, cracked, if the seller says yes to anything, then they have the option to come through and tell why. Why did I say yes? The rest of this form is if the property's in a HOA. So if a property's in an HOA, what's the HOA information? And then I think this is helpful too. What do your HOA dues cover? So if it's in an HOA, buyers usually want to know, what's that pay for? So the seller can say, well, it does, you know, landscaping and trash removal or whatever. Guys, please, please, please do not get this in your head that if a seller checks no representation for everything, they just come through and say no rep for everything. Please don't just assume that this is a shady seller trying to hide something. Maybe they are, but maybe they just don't know. Maybe they just don't know. What if, heaven forbid, something happened to my parents? I haven't lived in my parents' house in over 20 years. And I now am going to sell their house. I can't represent the stuff of their house. I haven't lived there, right? So just because I'm saying no representation doesn't mean that I'm hiding anything. Maybe I don't know. Maybe it had a tenant in there for the last, 5, 10, 15 years, whatever. So many agents, when they see no representation, have a flag go up. Oh, the seller's shady and they're trying to hide something. They're exercising their right as sellers in North Carolina. It's a mandatory form, which means they have to complete it. Mandatory form, optional disclosure. It is always the buyer's obligation to learn about the property while they're under contract, regardless of how the seller completes this form. And we're going to talk about the buyer's investigations and inspections when we're under contract. We start getting into that in Unit 10, really in Unit 21. So it doesn't matter. The buyer should just kind of use this as a guide. But no matter how the seller completes this form, the buyer is always encouraged to do their inspections and investigations. Questions or comments on our RPODs before we look at our MOG? You guys that have sold a house recently, you got to do one of these. Some sellers are very, very honest, very anxious to complete it to the best of their knowledge. Some just don't want to take the time. Honestly, some say it's just easier for me to say no representation, so that's the route I'm going to go. I had buyers once, we were looking at property and they wanted to see this house. And I pulled I was trying to see which one it was. I think somewhere in here it asks about mold. And they said yes. And then down here they said, black toxic mold, wear masks and enter at your own risk. And my buyer said, yeah, we're good. And I said, thank you, sellers, for sharing that. They were very upfront. They didn't want anybody to expose themselves. And yeah, they lost out on buyers, but anything can be priced right. If the price is right, you can take care of the mold once you purchase it. And that's what they were trying to do, was price it right. Questions or comments on this?
So I think, Julie, when we get into a situation like that in regards to mold, right, it's a defer to the professionals to say, hey, look, let's do either have an inspector or something, because not all mold is perceived as
exactly. And
like,
remember what we said in Unit
an
20. That's right. Remember, for a couple of things there, Darian, you touched on. First, I'm just a real estate agent. I'm not a mold expert. I don't know how they knew it was black toxic mold, but yes, if you were going to buy that house, you would want to have your mold guy, as part of your contract, under contract, determine what's the cost going to be to fix that. And then, yeah, the other thing that you touched on there was that, remember back in Unit 20, just the mere presence of mold isn't a material fact unless it's in excess. So if it's, a large amount of mold now, because mold is everywhere. And like we said, it can range from the mold on your bread that you've had too long to, black toxic mold, wear masks and enter with caution. So, but at the end of the day, I'm not a mold expert. I'm not a mold inspector. At the end of the day, I'm just a real estate agent. And it's really important, thank you for that, that we remember to stay in your lane. The MOG, mineral and oil and gas rights, again, instructions to property owners, how they can complete this form. This one is a little different. The seller can't say no representation for everything. So if you want to see this form best, kind of divide it in two. The top part of the form is addressing minerals. So mineral rights were severed from the previous owner. The seller can say yes, no, or no representation. Seller has severed the mineral rights, yes or no only. No representation is not an option. Or the seller intends to sever the mineral rights, yes or no only. No representation is not an option. And then we go through that little exercise again with oil and gas. So it was severed from the previous owners, the seller intends to sever it, or the seller has severed it. And then everybody signs. This one's just a one-page form for now. Questions? When we get into Unit 10 is our offer to purchase and contract, and we're going to see some other addenda and amendments. So Unit 10 is kind of our forms unit. So we actually see there's a place in the offer to purchase and contract for the buyer to acknowledge receipt of both the RPODs and the MOG. So the buyer has to check a box and say, yes, I've received it, or no, I haven't. But again, as agents, it's our job to facilitate that, to get them that information. There's one other thing that we've talked about that the seller has to disclose. They have no choice. If they know about it, they have to disclose it. Who remembers what that is? There's very few things that the seller actually has to disclose. Does anyone remember what the other thing was we talked about?
Was it sewer and septic?
Septic permit, yeah. We're going to provide them with a septic permit. But specifically, if the seller has knowledge, they have to disclose it. There we go.
Was a lead paint? Oh,
lead.
That's
Yep.
right. Lead paint.
Yep.
Yeah,
so once the seller learns that there's lead in the home, they have to disclose that. And that's a for sale and a for rent. So the lead-based paint, part of it is a seller disclosure as well. If the home was built prior to what year? I see your mouse go. You guys are awesome. Yep. 1978. We're going to have the seller disclose about the lead as well. Any questions at all about working with sellers? Okay. Well, up next, we're going to work with buyers. But before we do that, let's go ahead and take our break. It's a good breaking place. So let's take 10. We come back, we're going to start talking about working with buyers. I'm going to take attendance. So let's switch gears just a bit. We've worked with sellers. So let's talk now about working with buyers. And, oh man, it messed me up. What's the first thing you need to do in working with buyers? I already gave it away. When you work with a new buyer, what's one of the first things you need to do before you proceed far at all?
Disclosure, WWREA.
That's right, your WWREA. So, you know, it's one thing to meet a buyer to show a property. You may want to do it if you're, you know, showing them one of your listings or something, for example, just in case you hit first substantial contact. This is more of the buyer calling you saying, I'm interested in buying a house. Can you help me? You know, the conversation at some point is going to switch gears, right? So let's say you have them come into your office for a buyer consultation, for example, where you sit down and you go over the process of buying, the things that they can expect. You ask them questions like, what do you want to buy? How much house? You know, square footage, da, da, da. At some point during that conversation, first substantial contact is going to happen, right? So when you know you're getting ready to work with a buyer, we need to do our WWREA as soon as early as we can. Please remember to tell me you're back from break if you missed check-in. The Real Estate Commission says, once we do the WWREA, at that point, we need to decide at what capacity we're going to work with this buyer. Is that buyer going to be my client, or is that buyer going to be my customer? Don't I owe different duties to my client than I do my customer? So if I don't establish our relationship, if I don't define our role, how do I know how to act? How do I know if you're my client or my customer? How do I know if I owe you old car or if I just owe you honesty, fairness, and the disclosure material fact? So once we do the disclosure, we go over it, we review it, our Q&A with our pictures and everything, we have this conversation, then you say, how would you like me to proceed? And guys, I'm here to tell you, most buyers are going to say, oh, I want to hire you. I want to be your client. You know, it's going to be the rare buyer. And honestly, if they do not want to be represented, if they do want to be a customer, we may not have done a good job of explaining the differences in our services. I think if we explain the difference of our services, what buyer wouldn't want to be a client? Think about it. You want to fly first class or coach? So having this conversation with them, sitting down with them at the beginning, remember what we said, the buyer's agency agreement can begin as an oral agreement. Does everybody hear what I'm saying? Oral buyer agency is buyer agency. So even though I don't have them signing something, it's still an express agreement. And express means the terms are clearly stated either orally or in words. So even if I'm not having them sign a buyer's agency agreement right now, I'm still explaining them what it means to be a buyer's agent, for me to be their agent. So it's an express agreement. But either way, we decide in what capacity we're going to work. We do our WWRA. Now I can start asking the buyer all sorts of questions like, have you been pre-approved? How much do you want to spend in a house? Where do you want to live? How many bedrooms do you want? Right now I can start getting information from the buyer to help them find a suitable property. Remember, we have the field of unrepresented buyer. So if they choose to be a customer, there is no paperwork to do because they're not represented. They're not hiring me. They're not using an agency agreement. So all we need to do is make sure we make a notation on our WWREA about the unrepresented buyer. And then you need to make sure that the seller of the properties that they want to see allow the buyer to use sub-agency. Was it you guys or I think it was my day class. I'll pull this up on next break. When you look in MLS, you have you can see for each property agency options, and it says buyer agent only, sub-agent only, or both. So when your buyer customer says they want to see 123 Main Street, the first thing you need to do is go into MLS and make sure that the seller, that the firm will allow you as a seller subagent to show that property. I'll pull that up on next break so you guys can see. Again, I truly believe this. Sub-agency doesn't happen that much because I think most of us as agents are doing our job of explaining, why wouldn't you hire me? If the buyer originally decides to do seller sub-agency, you do your WWRA, they say, nah, I'm good. I don't need representation. I'll go through this unrepresented. And then somewhere later in the transaction, they change their mind. So they originally agreed to seller sub-agency, and then somewhere they said, well, why didn't I hire you? I want to be represented now. We can switch, but guys, it's not an ideal situation. If we're switching from a seller sub-agent to a buyer's agent, for this particular transaction, we need to, if we know anything about the seller, we need to remind the seller what we know about them. If for some reason we know something confidential, because think about it, we're leaving the seller to go to the buyer. And if we know anything confidential about the seller, we have to remind them what we know, and we have to have their permission to do so. So I have to have the seller's consent. I have to have the seller's permission. Again, this is strongly discouraged. I think we can see why this. You're kind of leaving the seller in a bad situation, right? This is what's best for the buyer, but you're leaving the seller in a bad situation. So it's discouraged. I would save it as a if need be thing only. Again, I go back and say, if we're explaining buyer's agency properly up front, then you shouldn't have to come across with this. It's one of those things, you join your firm, you sit through a buyer consultation with another agent, or your broker in charge sits through a buyer consultation with you. You go through it a few times, you'll get your spiel down. You'll get your spiel down. In just a second, we're getting ready to look at our exclusive buyer agency agreement. But I do just want to point out before we look at that, there's another type of buyer's agency, and that is a non-exclusive buyer agency agreement. In a non-exclusive buyer agency agreement, how many firms is the buyer dating? Non-exclusive. So how many firms are they dating? As many as they want. A lot. There you go. There you go. A lot. They're dating as many as they want. The only way that the broker, it's still a buyer agency agreement. I still owe you OCAR. But in a non-exclusive, the only time the buyer is obligated to pay me is when I find them the property. Again, this is one of these things. Some agents do not do non-exclusive buyer agency. Some firms will not allow it. Once again, I say, your exam is not going to be on what you're going to do or what you're not going to do. It's going to be on what you can do. I do have the non-exclusive buyer agency agreement in Learn Test Pass for you guys in Unit 8. We're not going to go through it. The more important one is the buyer agency, the exclusive buyer agency agreement. And that's the one we're getting ready to look at in just a second. Non-exclusive buyer agency? Is that your question? Oh, I got you now. Either way, I got you now. We saw this slide earlier back in Unit 7. Just a reminder that we do have the ability to work with a buyer under an oral buyer agency agreement at first. I have to put this in writing when I'm ready to present the offer on the buyer's behalf. I cannot present as a buyer's agent I cannot present an offer on somebody's behalf under an oral agreement. To secure my commission, I got to reduce that oral agreement to writing. We had a couple caveats with oral buyer agency. I cannot demand exclusivity. So an oral buyer agency, I cannot look at the buyer and say, you're going to work with me and only me. That buyer is free to date as many firms as they want to. The other thing with oral buyer agency, I cannot put a specific time frame on it. Under oral buyer agency, it's an open-ended period of time. If I want to say you're going to work with me for 2 months, then I got to put it in writing. So I cannot demand exclusivity, and I cannot put a time period on it. So the exclusive buyer agency agreement, buyer's only dating one firm. That firm gets paid when the buyer buys a house. May it be a house that's listed through another agent or firm or same firm, an MLS. Maybe it's a for sale by owner. They're hiring me to help me find and purchase a property. Exclusive buyer agency must be in writing. Remember, oral buyer agency, there is no exclusivity. So if you demand exclusivity, you got to get that thing in writing. And to terminate a buyer's agency agreement is not as long of a list. You either help them find and purchase the property, we go to closing, or it expires. Our buyer agency agreements have expiration dates as well. So on page 239, we talk about some buyer's agent's responsibilities. Obviously, this is not a full list. One of the very first questions, once you've established your relationship, you've done the WWREA, you've determined in what capacity you're going to work. Everybody good with that? With me, we've moved on from that. Now we're on step 2. As soon as we enter into step 2, one of the very first questions you need to ask your buyers is, have you talked to a lender? Have you talked to a lender? Guys, as real estate agents, we have got to stop showing properties to buyers that haven't had a conversation with a lender. The best thing I can do, if the buyer says no, even if the buyer says yeah, the buyer says, well, my cousin's a lender, so I talked to them, great. One of the best things I can do as their agent is encourage them to talk to 2 or 3 lenders. Shop around. Because all lenders offer a different product. There is no across the board. So encourage them. You can say, here's a list of 2 or 3 lenders that I've worked with in the past, or somebody in my firm has worked with. If you're brand new and you don't know any lenders, you'll get to know some, trust me. You'll see them at events. They're starting to bring us snacks back to the office. They're starting to bring us food again. So that's good. All our donuts went away for COVID, but donuts are coming back. So, if you like donuts, you're in the right industry, trust me. So you'll meet lenders, you'll have a good transaction with a lender, and then you'll have a lender on your preferred vendor list. There is nothing like having a relationship with a lender that you have stored in your phone that you can shoot a quick question to or something. So you'll form those relationships. That's part of you running your business, is building those relationships. But again, as you're just getting started, your firm will probably have a list of preferred vendors. So your firm will have a list. They'll be like, here's some lenders that we've talked to. Good question, Danielle. So what if you have your mortgage license as well? The general rule of thumb, if you have multiple licenses in a real estate transaction, the general rule of thumb, you can only wear one hat per transaction. So you need to decide, do I want to be a buyer in this or an agent in this transaction, or do I want to be a lender? So question number one is a buyer's agent. Have you worked with a lender? Do not show property. Do not show property until they've talked to a lender. There's this common misconception out there that what I pay for rent is what my mortgage is going to be. And it's two different maths, right? So let the lender determine. Units 14 and 15 are our financing unit. So we actually get to put on a lender's hat. We got a couple units in this book that we get to pretend to be a lender, get a basic understanding of that, how that works. So once we get a pre-approval or pre-qualification from the lender, we'll talk about those differences in units 14 and 15. Now we need to start selecting and finding properties to view. You know, ask the buyer questions. How many bedrooms? What do you want to use the space for? You know, try to get to the information. You just don't want to show them a house for the sake of showing them a house. Remember, that's your time, that's your mileage, that's your energy. So take some time to get to know the buyer and help them find out what they're looking for. And also, you guys, please keep in mind that once buyers get out and start looking at properties, their minds change. Once they start seeing things, it's very common to say, well, I know I said I wanted this, but, so you got to be flexible. Ask questions too. Let's say, for example, you're working with a couple and they have 2 kids. So the couple's going to have a bedroom and the 2 kids are going to have a bedroom. So we need a 3-bedroom house, right? And your buyers look at you and say, one of our criteria, one of our musts is a 4-bedroom house. And you start doing this math. You're like, well, there's the couple and 2 kids. May I ask what you need that 4th bedroom for? And they say, well, you know, since the pandemic, I'm working from home, so I need a space for my office. Okay, hang on. Maybe you don't need a 4-bedroom. Maybe we can make that work, but maybe we can also find you a 3-bedroom with an office or a 3-bedroom with a bonus, right? Just sometimes by asking questions, we can help them not necessarily find the right property, but maybe give them more options, maybe give them more things to consider. Once we select properties, we schedule showings, we go out and view the properties. We use a centralized showing system here in the Triad called Showing Time. So I can go in, schedule all my listings at once from all the firms. I don't have to go to different firms and schedule. It's all centralized. That's nice. We have the showings. Maybe you show one house and they walk in the front door and they say, this is it. This is the one. That usually doesn't happen. Maybe you show them 5 houses. Maybe you've been showing them houses for 5 weeks or 5 months. I can't tell you when that buyer is going to find the one. You might be with them longer, some longer than others. As a buyer's agent, I always feel that our job actually starts when the buyer says, this is it. This is the one I want. Let's write it up. Remember the other day we were talking about sellers and we said as a listing agent, all your work is done up front before it ever hits Zillow. As a buyer's agent, your work actually starts when the buyer says, I want to write it up. Prior to that point, you're just going around looking at pretty houses. So if you thought that's what you got to do as a real estate agent, part of that is true. And by the way, they are not all pretty. So you do get to go around and look at properties, see different homes. Once the buyer says this is the one, then I need to start researching the property, all the things that I looked up as the listing agent. If there's any question on zoning, I need to look that up. Tax information, what HOA, if there's covenants, get them that information. Helping them gather the information, the seller disclosures, the RPOs and the MOG. Filling in the information for the offer, help them complete the offer, advise them in completing the offer. At some point, your buyer's going to look at you and say, how much should I offer? Remember, a few slides ago, we talked about the CMA, the comparative market analysis. If I can use a CMA to help my seller determine probable sales price, why couldn't I use a CMA to help my buyer determine a good price to offer? So I'm helping them gather the information that we need. Again, we'll look at our offer to purchase and contract and those blanks that we have to fill in. Once we get under contract, no, I'm on page 239. Once we get under contract, we help the buyer do their inspections and their investigations. Talk to them, home inspector. They say, who should I use for a home inspector? Well, here's a list of 2 or 3 home inspectors I or someone in my firm have used. Radon test, pest inspection, anything they want to have inspected or investigate, we're going to assist them. And then our very last act, fingers crossed, is to go with them to the attorney's office and sit with them, sit next to them as they sign their paperwork and purchase their home. Again, we're going to do more on the contract to closing process and more about that buyer's period and the things they should be doing in Unit 21. Question comes in, is it different if your buyer decides to go new construction? They should always be encouraged to do inspections. There's no such thing as a perfect home, even new construction. Questions about the buyer's agent's responsibility. More to come. Unit 21. Buyer's agents may not just be working with properties listed in the MLS. Buyer's agents may be working with for sale by owners. We talked about asking the FSBO if they're willing to pay me. If they say no, the buyer has to pay me. There's only 2 parties to the transaction. There's only 2 people to pay me. So if the seller's not going to do it, then the buyer has to. And remember, you guys, my loyalty is to the person that hires me, not to the person that pays me. So if the buyer hires me and the for sale by owner is paying me, my loyalty is still to that buyer. We also talked, I think it was yesterday, about limited listing services. Buyers working with those listings. Commission is completely negotiable. And the commission advertised in MLS may not be the commission that your firm expects to collect. For example, I had buyers interested in a limited listing service. I looked it up in MLS. They were offering me 0.5% commission. They were offering me 0.5% commission to bring them a buyer. And I'm a little naive. I know this about myself. I can be naive sometimes. And I called the listing agent and said, I think you made a mistake in MLS. She said, no, that's all my seller is offered to pay a buyer's agent. 0.5%, y'all, that does not pay the bills. So what's the next thing I do? I called my buyer. This is the deal. They're not paying me enough. If you move forward with this property, you're going to have to pay me. You're going to have to ante sum up. And I had this conversation with them before we ever crossed the threshold, before we ever pulled into the driveway and looked at the property, because they need that full disclosure. My firm requires more. And that is spelled out in our buyer's agency agreement that we'll see in just a second. Taryn, I'll get you in just 1 second. Another thing, guys, remember, I can't put my own self above their interest. So let's say they want to see a property and I look it up and the listing agent is somebody that I didn't have a good experience with in the past. Can I call that buyer and say, nope, we're not going to go look at this listing? Sometimes we got to suck it up and do what's best for our clients, don't we? So we can't put our own self-interest, we can't put our own self in front of what's best for our buyers. If our buyer wants to see this property, trust me, your commission is protected. That's why you have a buyer's agency agreement. If you don't like this listing agent, figure out how to get along with them for the transaction, because it's not what's in your best interest or their best interest, it's what's in your buyers or sellers. So let's see, Tehran had a question.
Yes, I was gonna say, have you seen that more often since it's been a more competitive market, that sellers are not willing to give the full, I think the normal is like 3% or 6% in the sellers?
No normal. No
No
normal
normal.
commission.
Okay.
No, it's up to the firm. So
But have you seen that before?
I see commission all across the board. I see it all across the board because it's not fixed. There's no average. So this particular firm wanted to offer me 0.5%. That's firm's policy, and that was the agreement they have with the seller. That's their normal. You with me?
Gotcha.
Other questions? Remember, you guys, we need to be loyal to our clients. Don't worry about your commission. This is why you have a buyer's agency agreement. Again, if the seller's not paying you what your firm expects to collect, your buyers will. That's what they agree to when they sign. Do you have another question? Do I hear something?
Yeah, Julie, I guess where I'm struggling is trying to understand how this is relevant as a buyer's agent. Because from what I understand, the limited listing service is just the sellers receiving reduced services,
correct,
right, for that particular listing. Is it important that we know that from a buyer's agent perspective, because it's directly associated with commission, or why is it? I guess I'm missing. Why is it important for this particular topic?
It could be in several incidences that the listing agent directs you to communicate with the seller. For example, because that's not a service they're providing. So submit all offers to the seller. Here's the seller's phone number, call them, so we need to understand that these firms are out there and they're perfectly legal and there's nothing wrong with them, because we're going to encounter them. And it's not just calling the listing agent or submitting your offer to the listing agent. In a lot of cases, it's dealing directly with the seller. But that's the relationship. And quite frequently, commission may not be what your firm expects to collect. So as a buyer's agent, if I want to protect myself, again, 0.5% doesn't cut it. So as that buyer's agent, we had this conversation before we ever pulled in the driveway. I called them right back and said, we're good for this afternoon, but you guys are going to have to, ante up some of my commission. So we discuss it because it's out there, because it's something different than a full service brokerage company. And while it is different services to the seller, the buyer's agents need to be aware that communicating, commission, that kind of thing may look a little bit different.
Okay. All right. I think that clears it up, because I was a little confused, because this is predominantly a seller's term. Why would we be interested as a buyer's agent? But you cleared it.
Okay. So what we're going to do now, we're going to go look at our exclusive buyer agency agreement. Again, I got to learn test pass. Please don't look at forms in the book. Just don't. Every form you need is in Learn Test Pass. So let's go. First off, here's the non-exclusive buyer agency agreement. I'm not going to go through this. You guys can flip through this if you want to. What we're going to look at is the exclusive buyer agency agreement. And once again, your book talks about the agency agreement starting on page 240 to 241. So the terms that your book talks about, I've highlighted for you guys. A lot of the terms in the buyer's agency agreement is similar to what we saw in the listing agreement. Just change the name, seller to buyer, right? So I've highlighted those terms. The differences are what's on page 240 and 241. And of course, I've highlighted those as well. So the exclusive buyer agency agreement is between the buyer and the firm, the relationship between the buyer and the firm. Buyer represents is this date. They're not a party to another exclusive buyer agency agreement. They're also going to represent that they've seen the working with real estate agent disclosure. And first in the agency agreement, we have type of property. This is something we did not see in the listing agreement. The buyer and the firm, the agent, need to identify what kind of property we're looking at. We're looking at residential, we're looking at commercial, we're looking at other. Is it a mixture of the two? And the general location. You know, you're not locked into an area, but it's a general location. The other day, we talked about what happens if the buyer refuses to sign buyer agency. They don't want to be a client. They don't want to be a customer. And maybe one of our options is to get an agency agreement just for one address. So if we can get the buyer to sign that for one address, then we can just fill that in as the general location. And that way we only have an agency agreement for 123 Main Street. You know, if you're just looking at a certain subdivision or a certain city or county, or maybe the triad, right? Whatever, every buyer's different. Some are more, you know, centralized than others. So depending on the general location that they're looking. I had buyers once, he said, 45 minutes away from PTI. That pretty much covered the entire triad, didn't it? I mean, every, you know, all around. So, you know, some have a more specific geographical location than others. A question came in about the working with real estate agent disclosure. That is never oral, that's always signed. It's not a contract, and it's always signed. And the disclosure does not create agency. What creates agency? The exclusive buyer agency agreement. Effective date, effect of agreement, termination of agreement. Remember, we have to have a definite end date. For buyers, we could be working with one or two buyers. If we're working with one buyer that wants to buy one home, we have buyers who intend to purchase a single property, or you might be working with an investor. So for buyers who may purchase more than one property, so we can identify an expiration date for whatever type of buyer we're working for. Here's our compensation. Firm acknowledges, remember we talked about the retainer the other day, the retainer fee. So if you're going to collect a retainer fee, then you have that here that you can fill that in. Buyer agrees that firm's fee is paid under the following conditions. Let's see, I want to make sure we point this out because this tends to be a source of confusion. So I want to make sure we understand. Firms shall seek the fee from a cooperating listing firm through the MLS or from the seller if there is no listing firm, and buyer agrees that firm shall be entitled to receive in the same consideration. So we say in the listing agreement, I'm always going to ask the seller first. I'm always going to look at MLS to see what they're paying me, or I'm going to ask the for sale by owner, will you pay me? If the buyer purchases the property where compensation is less than the fee or where no compensation is offered, buyer and firm agree that buyer will pay the difference between the firm and the compensation. So it's embedded in our agency agreement. First provision says, I'm always going to ask the seller first. Second one says, if the seller can't or won't, you have to. Again, there's only two parties. There's only two people to pay me. And that's one thing I can do as a buyer's agent is tell my buyer, I'm going to try to get somebody else to pay me first. But if they won't do it, you have to, because there's nobody else left. Everybody good with that? Don't worry about getting paid. If you have an agency agreement, you're due a commission. May that be a listing agreement or a buyer's agency agreement. This talks about when the compensation is earned. We talked the other night about earning your commission versus when you actually get paid. So we spell that out again in the buyer's agency agreement. Remember, our agency agreements are a two-way street. Both parties have duties and obligations to each other. So the firm has duties to the buyer. We're going to help them seek a property at a price and term acceptable to the buyer. We're going to present all offers in a timely manner. We're going to disclose all material facts. We're going to account for any money received during the property. So we tell the buyer, this is our job. This is what we're going to do. This is our non-discrimination clause, Unit 19, our fair housing unit. Both listing and buyer's agency agreement have these buyer letters to sellers. I call them love letters. These have gotten really popular with the multiple offer world, the low inventory world that we're living in. Love letters are starting to, they're not being done as much. There's some concerns about violating fair housing. So if a buyer sends a letter talking about their family can see themselves spending Christmas in this living room, we've touched on familial status, we've touched on religion, we've touched on several protected classes of fair housing. So the love letters, they're still out there and they're still happening, but the National Association of Realtors is starting to come down on them and advise buyers and sellers, buyers not to write them, sellers not to look at them. Guys, I think bottom line, sellers should care about how much are you willing to pay? You know, it should all be come down to green, but just be aware that these have been a hot topic within the last year or so. Hot topic enough that they made it into our agency agreements. Buyer owes duties to the firm. Buyer agrees they're going to work exclusively with the firm. Buyer's going to refer the firm any information they may have in a property. So if the buyer finds a for sale by owner, for example, the buyer can't reach out to the for sale by owner because we have an agency agreement that says, I'm going to do that for you. I'm going to help you find the property. The buyer needs to be available for reasonable periods of time to examine the property. Conduct all negotiations and communications through the firm. Let me handle talking to the listing agent and the sellers. Buyers responsible for paying for their surveys, their water tests, title reports, property inspections, etc. Anything that the buyer's going to do to learn about the property that we're going to talk about in Unit 21, that is a buyer's responsibility, buyer's duty to the firm. Other professional advice, this is another thing that we didn't see in the listing agreement. Buyers are looking at me more, again, I don't know any good lenders, do you? Who should do my home inspection? I don't know, a closing attorney. Can you recommend anybody? Buyers are looking more at me to advise other settlement service providers. Guys, we can never look at a buyer and say, this is the attorney we're using, this is the lender we're using, this is the home inspector we're using. The buyer pays for these services, so the buyer gets to decide. And that's why I respond with stuff like, here's a list of 2 or 3 closing attorneys I've used that I've had a good experience with. Home inspectors, lenders. If I tell my buyer, here's 3 home inspectors, does my buyer have to use any of those 3 home inspectors? No, they're free to hire whoever they want to. Okay, so just because I may recommend doesn't mean that they have to. That's the kind of professional advice that they're looking towards us as the buyer's agent. Don't go to Google. They can do that. That's why we say professional advice. This is why your firm has preferred vendor lists. Keeping in mind they're free to use whoever they want to. Provide them with some sample stuff, sample offer to purchase. There's a nice Q&A on home inspections, that kind of thing. The other thing we did not see in the listing agreement is confidentiality of offers. There's a commission law and rule that we'll get to that says I cannot disclose the term of the buyer's offer without the buyer's permission. I owe them that confidentially. So I present the offer. The seller has that, or the listing agent has that same obligation. So if you're the listing agent, for example, in a multiple offer situation, and you have 3 offers in your hand, and buyer number 4 calls you and says, what did the other guys offer? You can't answer that without their permission. And do you think any buyer in their right mind is going to give you permission to offer the terms of their offer? No, you're just telling them what to compete with. So we owe them that confidentiality of offer. We're not going to discuss it with other buyers making offers, competing for that property. Here is dual agency as explained to the buyer. So we saw dual agency as it was explained to the seller in the listing agreement. Here's dual agency. Here's yet another good opportunity for you guys to review dual agency. See how we can explain it to the buyer. Again, use the forms to help put words in your mouth. Once we explain dual agency, either the buyer authorizes the firm to act as a dual agent, or they do not authorize the firm to act as a dual agent. We get a yes or a no. And if they say yes, does the buyer authorize designated dual agency? So again, listing agreement, buyer's agency agreement, unit 7, license law and commission rule. We touch on dual and designated several times. So you guys, I like that you guys have several different ways to expose yourself to it. So you take advantage of this. Try it with your family. If you can explain dual agency to your family so that they understand it, you're good for your test. You with me? If you're explaining dual agency to your family and they're lost, come back and study it some more. That's a great way to know how you're doing. Are your families hanging in there with you? I know they're pretty much going through this pre-licensing class as well, some of them, aren't they? Let's see, dual agency compensation. If the firm collects commission different for a dual agency situation, we're going to spell this out. Again, mediation. Let's just try to handle it mediation as opposed to going to full-blown court. Surveillance, we saw this in the listing agreement. The sellers can have video, but they can't have audio. Even with that being said, I still caution my buyers about what they say, because I unfortunately cannot trust all the sellers out there. So just, especially if the home is occupied, just let them know when you're going. There very well may be cameras. They shouldn't have audio, but in the event that they do, be careful what you say. I really do not care about the buyer walking in the front door and going, oh God, that carpet is so tacky. I don't care about that. As a buyer's agent, I don't want the buyer saying something, expressing how much they love this home and hurting their negotiations if we ever bring the offer. If the seller hears the buyer say, Julie, I love this house, when can we write it up? The seller just saw a whole bunch of dollar signs, didn't they? And that's what I caution my buyer about. Let's wait till we get outside to talk about it, or back to the office or Starbucks or whatever you're going to do. So we just have this conversation. When the buyers are viewing the home, buyers are allowed to take pictures. They're allowed to take video unless the seller says no. So sometimes buyers will want to, maybe you're showing a property to one of the spouses after work and the other one got hung up and couldn't make it. So spouse number 1 is going through the house, snapping some pictures to take home to spouse number 2 to see if they want to see it, right? That might be one thing. When I'm showing multiple homes in one day, I encourage buyers to take notes for each home, because guys, I'm telling you, after a while, they all run together. And if you have a big day of showings where you go out and show like 12 properties, at the end of the day, you're going, okay, which kitchen was in that house? Which house was in that kitchen, right? You're trying to piecemeal a house and put it together. So encourage your buyers to take notes, to take pictures, to take things that can help them remember the features of the homes that they really, really like, so that doesn't get all blended together. Your buyers, this is part of the reason why you are there, what they're showing. Your buyers need to understand that they are there taking pictures of the property, of the space. They are not there taking pictures of the stuff. They're not there, you know, scoping stuff out or trying to take pictures of documents. You know, we had the conversation with sellers about putting up personal stuff, but that's not always the case. Y'all want to know the story I heard today from one of my teammates today? He showed a property. There was a handgun on top of the refrigerator. There was a handgun underneath one of the cabinets. Sellers just left handguns all over the place. He called the listing agent and said, you need to have a conversation with your sellers because that's not cool. What if one of those got in the wrong hand? And what if those buyers weren't trustworthy and they were scoping the home out and they saw something they liked? You guys with me? Sellers got to be cool. And buyers need to respect seller stuff. Buyers need to respect the fact that this isn't their house yet. It's still the seller's home. If the seller asks you to take your shoes off before you enter, you take your shoes off. It's their home. So respect their home, respect their stuff. Buyers agents, be with your buyers as they go through the home. You could be responsible for them. You could ultimately be responsible. If you just open the door and say, have that, and let them run amok in the home and something happens, you could be responsible. There's like private Facebook groups for real estate agents. There was one not too terribly long ago. The sellers had video cameras, no audio, but they had video cameras. And they caught the buyers. The kids were jumping up and down on the beds. The kids were going from room to room, jumping up and down on the beds. And the agent was just standing there chit-chatting with the buyers, like, you know, and then when they were done, they went straight the sheets back out and left. And the sellers are sitting here watching this in horror. Respect their stuff, their space. Respect the fact that you're in their home. Questions or comments on that? Isn't that something? I had buyers under contract once, and I was just working with the buyers to show property, but then because they had like 6 kids. So once we went under contract, then I met the kids, and we went under contract, and the kids and mom and dad wanted to see it. So I had 8 people, 6 of them being kids. I divided us into teams of 2. So we're going to go through this. Half are you going to hang out in the front yard while I go through the house, and then we're going to come back and we're going to switch up. I divvied us up because the last thing I wanted was 6 kids running amok over the house and jumping on beds or breaking something. So I took control of the situation. Dad was upset that the seller wanted us to take their shoes. Well, actually, Dad was upset with me when I asked him to take his shoes off. I'm like, it's the seller's rules. It's still the seller's house. Comments on that? Questions? Again, a wire fraud warning. We saw a wire fraud warning to the seller in the listing agreement. We're going to talk about wire fraud when we look at the offer to purchase and contract. So we'll come back, talk more about wire fraud. We see a wire fraud warning to both buyer and seller. So then we have our signatures page. Buyer, I have a place for 2 buyers and their contact information to sign. If you have more than 2 buyers, then you we have an additional signatures addendum. So it's just a form that looks, you know, like this right here, and you get like, I think 8 more signatures. So however many people plan to be on this deed to purchase this property need to sign the buyer agency agreement. If the buyer's an entity, there's a place for an entity buyer, a business. And then we have the firm information. Again, the firm name, license number, signed by the individual agent. As an agent with a firm, as a general agent with the firm, I'm allowed to sign the agency agreement on the buyer's behalf. And all agency agreements have to have my license number. Questions? Comments? Private chat. I should have said that earlier. Sorry. Private chat. Tell me 1, 2, or 3, A, B, or C. I'll know what you're talking about. Hint, there might be more than one right answer. Okay, I think for the most part, we're looking pretty good here. So an agent must have a buyer agency agreement signed when? At the time I'm ready to present an offer on behalf of the buyer, or if I attempt to limit, if I try to make the relationship exclusive, if I attempt to limit the buyer's ability to work with other agents. I cannot demand exclusivity on an oral buyer agency agreement. First substantial contact is for what? Yeah.
So the first one at time of first substantial contact, that's WWREA, right?
You just answered my question. That's right. So we do the working with, yep. We do the working with real estate agents no later than the time of first substantial contact. Is everybody good? Does everybody hear what I'm saying? Agency disclosure and agency agreements are two different things. Agency disclosure does not create agency. What creates agency are agency agreements. Questions? Let me say one more thing before we take a break. Last thing before we get to the math, guess what we get to do after break? Page 241, we talk about dual agency again. I think we're exposing it again and again and again and again. I promise you, the more you see it, the more you read it, the more you see it, the better it's going to get, the easier it's going to get. Try that trick of explaining it to your family. Can we all agree now that dual agency is not what's best for the buyer and the seller? They hire me to be their advocate. And dual agency, I'm going, sorry, I can't be your advocate. There's an obvious potential for conflict of interest. That conflict of interest is keeping that buyer and seller separated fairly. Doing what you do for one, you do for all. I can't give advice to one that I can't give to the other, that won't harm the other, I should say. So we got to avoid that conflict of interest by properly handling dual agency. How we properly handle dual agency is we enter into dual agency with having informed written consent of both parties. Do not look at your buyers and sellers and say, we're gonna do dual, sign here. That's not giving informed consent. How do you give informed consent? You go over dual agency in the listing agreement. You go over dual agency in the buyer's agency agreement. Question came in, can I do a CMA during dual agency? I can. It better be the same CMA though, right? I can provide a CMA, but I can't try to tweak the numbers, one to look better for the seller and one to look better for the buyer. I'm still helping the buyer get through the transaction and the seller. So I do the CMAs, the buyer looks at me and says, what should I offer? Here's the CMA. What do you want to offer? Good question. Back to showing properties to buyers. Let me say one more thing about that. Buyers should be encouraged to look in closets, cabinets, anything that's going to stay, right? Because if they're purchasing this property, don't they have a right to know what it looks, the closet looks inside? Again, help them see the space. Buyers should not be looking in desk drawers, dresser drawers, things that are going to go. So again, that's part of why we're with them. Some buyers are afraid to do that, and I get that. That's a total respect thing. Help, open the kitchen cabinets for them. I tell you guys, something that came out of COVID that I really liked and I wish that would have stayed. When we were showing properties during COVID, sellers were leaving cabinet doors and closet doors open because they didn't want buyers coming in and touching stuff. So they were leaving everything. And I said, man, that's nice. I hope that doesn't go away. But yeah, we've already stopped doing that. So, but buyers liked it because they didn't have that fear of, oh, can I touch this? So, okay, I just wanted to throw that in there. Any questions? All right, let's take a break, get your calculators, because we come back, we're going to figure out some commission math. Y'all ready to figure out how much you're going to make? This is the fun math. Agents blow my mind. They tell me I'm bad at math. I'm bad at math. But by golly, buyer calls them and says, I want to see 123 Main Street. They're looking it up while they're talking to their buyer. And while they're looking it up, they're figuring out when they sell how much 123 Main Street, how much are they going to sell? So even if you're bad at math, you know how to do your commission math, right? I hope so. So we're going to get into that. So camera's on. And before we do that, I do want to, I promise you guys, I pull this up in MLS just so you can see. And I can't show you an actual listing just because there's more information than what we can. But what I can do is show you. So this is like just a blank input if you were in Tried MLS and if you were putting in an input, if you're putting a listing in, anything you see yellow is required. So you got to put certain information in. And if you look here under agency type, these are our options. You have to select one. So if you look under agency type, you can be both. You can be the buyer agent only, or you can be a sub agent only. Can you guys see that okay? Over on the left. So whatever one I select, once I submit the listing, now your buyer says, I want to see this listing. And you'll see if you're a sub agent, but it says buyer agent only, you can't show that to your buyer customer. That's what the firm and the seller are saying. They are saying we only want buyer agent only. If it says both in your customer, if it says sub agent only, I think that's a mistake because now what they're saying is they only want customers and no clients. And I don't think that's accurate. So you look in the listing, again, you see more as a member of MLS than what you guys would see on Zillow. And this agency type is definitely something you would see. Questions or comments on that? Look at the commission. And if you're a sub agent, make sure you can show it. Make sure you're welcome by the seller and the firm.
And Julie, just to be sure, under comp type, that's where we would find if it's going to be.
You're looking at more, but yeah, is it a percentage? Is it, yeah, we list, is it a dollar amount? Yep. Don't worry about the rest of that. I was just trying to show you. And again, I can't show you a listing. So that's the best I could do. Okay, questions? You already do some math? Yay. Before we talk about anything, this is what I call the commission math map. Why don't you guys take a few minutes, take a picture, draw it out, whatever you can do fastest, but just take a few minutes. I want to take a picture with your phone, something you can reference as we start looking at this commission math. So take a few minutes, somehow get this in front of you, and then we'll talk about it. So the commission math map, this is your map. Use this as a visual, okay? At the top of the visual, you have your total commission, your sales price, the big picture. And then you go down to the next tier. The next tier is how are we sharing the commission between the sides? So you have the total commission. We're going to split that between the listing side and the selling side. Remember, we said the selling side was the side bringing the buyer. So you have the side selling the property, you have the side listing the property. Please understand, listing side and selling side don't always have to be 50-50. It could be a 30-40 split. It could be a, you know, whatever. What we need to know is that the listing side plus the selling side has to equal the total commission. So however we're going to split it, the two sides together equal the total commission. Once the side has been paid, then we take it a step further and split the commission between the firm and the agent. So the firm gets paid and then they share their commission with the agent. Now I got T-bars for this, do not worry. We're going to have problems where they either give you the total commission or they give you the sales price. They give you somehow in this top tier. And then they may ask, what is the, for example, what is the listing agent's commission? That would be a two-step problem. You go down two tiers. You first find the listing side, and then you take the listing side's commission and you split it again with the agent. And what this map shows us, if you're starting at the top and working your way down, the steps that you take down are to multiply. Everybody see this on the side? If, for example, the question starts, the question gives you the selling agent's commission. This is how much the selling agent received. And they want to know what the sales price is or the total commission is. Now you're working up. You're starting small, finding what the side got and then what the commission got. When you're working up the commission math, you divide. So that one may be to help you know, when do I multiply and when do I divide? If you use the map as your guide to help you see, again, if you're working down from total commission to the listing agent, you multiply. If you're working from the selling agent up to the total commission, you divide. What you're looking at here is very similar to what we see on page 242. On page 242, we started at the top. We had a sales price of $189. Total commission is 6%. So total commission is $11,340. In this case, it's a 50-50 split. Everybody see that? ABC gets 50%, Homes Realty gets 50%. So you take the total commission of $11,340, divide by 2, or times 50%, whatever. Each side gets $5,670. Now for Homes Realty, we're going to take that a step further. The problem tells us the firm gets 45% and the agent gets 55%. Their percentage is of the selling side. Their commission is of whatever the Homes Realty. I'm on page 242. So that's our visual. Use the map as just that. It's a map. So use it to help you see the direction that we're going. Any questions so far? We're getting ready to look at formulas, and of course we'll do some together. Everybody see how this works. The firm gets paid, and then the firm shares their commission with the agent. Anytime you come down, you're looking at a new formula. So to start with the top, our first T-bar says we're going to have total commission as part of the sales price. Depending on how the problem's worded, this is where it gets fun. It could be listing commission, it could be selling commission, it could be total commission. So whatever number, that's what that asterisk means, total commission. but maybe it tells you how much the listing side is going to collect, how much the selling side is going to collect. It depends on how the problem's stated. These are the problems, commission math problems are the ones that they like to give you distractors. And what's a distractor's job? To distract you. So I think using the map and following where you're supposed to go, what you're supposed to do. And is it the listing side? Is it the selling side? Is it the total commission? They're all different. So the best way for you to get these is to practice, is to expose yourself to several different problems so you can see different ways that they work. So where we are now, we just figured the total commission as part of the sales price. So if we go back to 242, we would have just solved total commission of 11,340. And then we can take that and divide it by 2 or times 50%, whatever you want, to get the side commission. So in 242, we're at Holmes Realty. Once you have the sides commission, then you get to use another T-bar. Is it the listing side? Is it the selling side? You have to know what the problem's asking you. Once you have the sides commission, now you're figuring out the firm or the agent's commission. So the second tier, I know how much Holmes Realty is getting. Now I need to figure out either what Agent Ted's share is or Holmes Realty share is. The firm shares their commission with the agent. So what this asterisk down here means is it's either going to be the listing side or the selling side, depending on what side it's asking you. Whose commission are they asking you about? Questions so far? I'm going to go back for 1 second. These are problems. They give you a whole, these are the good ones for distractors. They give you a whole bunch of information. What you guys need to do is focus on what the question's asking you. If the problem is asking you how much does the selling agent get paid, do you care about the listing side? They're going to give you information for both. They're going to tell you what the listing side gets and what the selling side gets and the listing agent split. They're going to give you information for the whole thing. But if they ask you for the selling agent, the only information you care about is with the selling side, right? So again, kind of use the map to help you stay focused with these. I mean, some of these math problems get long. So use the visual, use the image. Everybody good so far? Okay. So let's see what we got here. A home is listed for $230,000 and sells for $227,000 with 6% total commission being charged. The listing firm is cooperating with the firm who produces a buyer by offering them 2.5% of the sales price. Based on this information, what is the listing side commission of the sale? And guys, I apologize. Hang on just for 1 second. I did just stop sharing my screen. I forgot with these, I need to give me a whiteboard. So bear with me 1 second so I have somewhere to write. So what I call a whiteboard, you might call Microsoft Word, but I get my point across. So The home is listed for 230 and sells for 227. We are paid off of the sales price. It doesn't matter what it's listed for. I'm paid for what it closes for. So right off the bat, there's a distractor, isn't there? The listing price is a distraction because we are paid off of what it closes for, what it sells for. So I have a sales price of 227. I have a 6% total commission being charged. So my total commission is 6%. I'm just mapping out I'm taking the information and I'm mapping out the information. The listing firm is going to cooperate. So this is list. This is sell. The listing firm is cooperating with the firm who produces a buyer by offering them 2.5%. So the selling firm is getting 2.5%. The listing firm gets what's left, right? The total commission is 6%. So 6 minus 2.5 is what, 3.5 probably? I never go off calculator. So if the selling side is getting 2.5%, that means the listing side is getting 3.5%. Do I have everybody so far? Everybody good so far? Everybody see where I get 3.5%? I took the 6, we divvied it up. The problem wants to know about the listing side. What's the listing side commission? In this case, we're not taking a step further. We're just looking at the side, the first tier. What the listing side is getting is 3.5% of the sales price. Remember what the word of means in a math problem? What does the word of mean in a math problem?
Multiply.
Multiply. So we're sales price is 227,000 of 3.5%, 3.5, or if I've got you, we have our sales price. Julie says the rate or percent always goes in the bottom right. So using the T-bar, that's how that would look. So based on this information, what is the listing side commission on the sale?
$7,945.
Yep. Chats coming in. Yep. Do chats. Yep. So we take our 227 times 3.5%, and we get a listing side commission of 7,945. Now, if the problem went on, I understand that it doesn't, but if it went on, now I would have listing side commission of 79.45. Where'd it go? 79.45. And we would take that and split that 7,945 between the firm and the agent. So if the problem went on and gave us the information, we would have to know how that split of the 7,945 with the firm and the agent. So for example, let's say the agent, I don't know, what kind of compensation split do you want? You guys want 80%? So let's say the agent is on an 80% compensation split, the listing agent, just for example. If the agent's getting 80%, that means the firm's getting 20%, yes? So if the problem went on and wanted to know how much the agent was going to get, then we would use another T-bar. Now I'm using my list side. I'm using the agent split of 80%. And to figure out the agent's commission, of the 79.45, yep, the agent's getting paid $6,356. So we'll put that there so we can see the agent. Now I'll just leave that there. So we first found the sides commission. We split it once between the two sides. And then we split it again between the agent and the firm. The firm gets the check. They share their commission with the agent. At the end of this transaction, in this example, the agent will get a check for $6,356. Questions? Yeah. Yeah, Claire?
What percentage of the commission does the firm usually take?
There is no usual.
Okay.
It's firm's policy.
Have you met or have you been exposed to firms that do 50-50, or is it usually?
Yeah.
So that's
50-50, 60-40, 70-30, 80-20, 90-10.
Wow.
95-5.
So that's one of the things we need to explore as we look for a firm.
Compensation plans, because the firm's compensation plan is going to tell you how much of that split you're going to get. Sometimes it's tiered. Sometimes they say you get X amount until you sell this much, and after this much you get more, right? When you cap, you get more. So some just say you get, guys, the higher your split, the less you get from the firm. You can find a firm with 100% compensation split. You can, they're out there. But if you find 100% compensation split, you're buying your yard signs, your lock boxes, they're not providing training, right? Right? The higher your split, the less you get. You got to ask yourself what's important to you. And that's why I want you guys shopping around, because if you're on a 60-40 split, if you're getting 60%, they might be including signs and lock boxes and training. You guys with me? 100% sounds great, I know. But you got to look at the big picture. You got to look at all firms that you're talking to, compensation plans. Yeah, Claire?
If the firm has a 100% compensation split toward the agent, how are they earning any money? The firm?
There's usually a transaction fee with those. So they'll take X amount per transaction. That just like pays for the power bill and, your broker in charge. And because, they got bills to pay too, right? What are those bills you sit down and pay every month? Your firm, rent, mortgage, your firm has to pay those as well. So with 100%, with those higher splits, usually there's some kind of transaction fee where you pay X amount. Questions on the math. I can't answer questions about firm compensation because they're all different. That's why I want you guys shopping around. Everybody good? Use the math. Practice. I cannot stress this enough. You got to practice, but use the math to help see which direction you're going. Okay? Why don't you guys try one on your own? Throw you in the deep end. I don't know how y'all get in a pool, but I just hold my nose and jump. So here you go. I'm kicking you off the diving board. So let me I'll give you about 5 minutes. Take some time, pick up your calculator, put pencil to paper and try something. What can it hurt you to try? So here's a problem, maybe. There it is. Take a few minutes, Then we'll come back and talk about it. Sorry to interrupt. If you want to tell me the answer, please just make sure to do so in a private chat, private message. Give you about 30 more seconds. Okay. So when you saw this problem, what did you do first? Did you just pick up your calculator and started going crazy and doing something with the numbers? Or did you just read it? Whenever you see math, just read it. Elizabeth lists a property for sale. Her firm has a written policy of charging 7% on all transactions. The listing firm has agreed they will cooperate with the firm that brings the buyer by offering them 3% of the total sales price. Elizabeth's commission split is 70%. Based on this information, how much commission will Elizabeth earn if the property sells for $285? So if we look at our commission map, at the top, we have our sales price of $285. I know my total commission split is 7%. The listing side, let's see, the side bringing the buyer gets 3%. So if the side bringing the buyer gets 3%, how much does the listing side get? 7% is the total. They're giving 3 away, which means they're keeping 4 for themselves. So the listing side gets 4%. The other side gets 3%. Do I care about the other side? No. Who do I care about in this case? There's only one thing I care about, and I care about Elizabeth. What's the information I need to get to Elizabeth's commission? Yeah.
You sort of kind of do care about the other side just from a checking your math perspective.
Now at this point, because I have the information I need, right? So now I'm done with the other side.
Yeah, but I'm saying just from a practical math check perspective, the two need to add up.
So you want to add them together? Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just trying to rule out distractions, right? Because once we get to, but however you see it. So that's a very good point. So if we want to care about the other side, because 4 + 3 = 7, right? So we have what we need from the listing side. Okay. The listing side gets 4% of the sales price. Sales price is $285. They get 4% of that. So how much is the listing side going to get? $285.
$11,400.
That's 4%. So we get on the listing side $11,400. That's how much the side collected. Now we're going to take that and split it between the firm and Elizabeth. So if Elizabeth gets 70% of the side, then the firm gets 30% of the side. Everybody with me? So we took the side's commission, and now we're going to split it between the firm and Elizabeth, caring specifically about Elizabeth. So the firm's commission is $11,400. Elizabeth gets 70%. So what is Elizabeth's commission? $7,980. See how we worked our way down the map? And every step I took, I multiplied, right? Because I was working down. You'll have some practice problems where, for example, they will give you Elizabeth's commission and they'll want to know what the sales price is. So you'll be working up the commission tree. They'll tell you Elizabeth makes $7,980. She has a 70% split with her firm. The list side collected 4%. What is the sales price? So that's what that, if you're working down, multiply means. If you're working up, divide. A lot of you second guess yourself. Not a lot of you, several of you second guess yourself and change your mind. And for those of you that did, you had it right the first time. And then you guys are great because you came back and said, no, stick with that. I'm good. Never mind. I got it. So, you know, it's good. That's good that you're thinking it through. Absolutely. Questions? I got lots of practice for you. Never fear.
Yeah. So that 30%, where did that 30% come in play at? Because
if Elizabeth's getting 70, then the firm is going to get 30.
That's 100%.
That's their split, right? So of the listing side, Elizabeth gets 70% and the firm gets 30. 70 and 30 is going to total the 11,400. Does that answer?
Yes.
This is typically how residential, the split. And again, what's your split? What's your split with your firm? It's all different. It's all different. The best advice I have to offer you is to talk to several different firms because they're all different. Commercial commission tends to be treated a little differently. Commercial commission tends to work a little differently. And to do commercial math, I don't really have a formula for it. To do commercial math, we just got to do it. Commercial math is referred to a graduated sales commission. When you see graduated sales commission, this is typically, not all the time, because all firms are different, but this is typically how commercial agents get paid. So we're going to go through this together. A firm pays their brokers a commission based on the graduated sales commission plan. Per the agreement, the firm will pay 5% commission on the first $200,000 of the sales price, 3% on the next $200,000, and 1% any amount over that. How much commission will the firm receive on a sales price of $900,000? Commercial commission is still based off of the sales price. So I'm starting with $900,000. And why it's graduated is because of how it's, X amount on the first 200,000, X amount on the next, and then whatever's left off that. That's that graduated. You're paid so much on each level. So this particular firm, they pay 5% on the first 200,000. They pay 3% on the next 200,000. And then they pay 1% on whatever's left. So I've accounted for the first 200. I've accounted for the second 200. What's left after I deduct that from $900,000? So if you take your 900 minus the first 200 minus the second 200,
500,000.
Anything over that is $500,000, and they're paid 1% of that. Everybody see what we did? I started with the sales price. I accounted for the first 200. I accounted for the second 200, and then whatever's left, we're going to take 1% commission. So now we take 200,000 times 5%, get 10,000. We take 200,000 times 3% and get 6,000. Is that right?
2 times 3 is 6.
6,000. And then 500,000 times 1% to get 5,000. So on the first 200,000, you pay $10,000 commission. The next 200, you pay 6, and then after that, you pay 5. Add it all up.
$1,000.
And yet the firm, yes, will receive $21,000. And then from there, the firm will split it between the firm and the agent. So is it a 70-30 split or an 80-20 split, whatever that compensation plan looks like. Yeah, Diane?
I'm going to ask the dumb question, but why can't you just do 9% into 900,000? Why do you have to do the longhand?
Because you're not paying 9% on 900,000. Let's pretend for a second. What if the sales price was $200,000? How much commission are you going to get? $200,000 sales price.
Are you going off of that?
So the first 200 is off of 5%. So if it was 200,000, then you would get a commission of $10,000. See, each level is a different percentage. The first 200 is 5%. The next 200 in this case is 3%, and then anything after that. So it's graduated. It's the graduated plan, if you will. You're not paid 6% on 900,000. If the sales price was 200,000, it'd only be 5%. So 9% of 900,000 be $81,000. You're not paid off of, you're paid off of the sales price, but it's the sales price in tiers. It's the sales price in levels. Yeah, Danielle?
You just answered my question. I was going to say, does graduated basically mean levels?
Yeah. So you have to know, obviously, the sales price where you start. You have to know the levels. You have to know the tiers, and then your balance. I mean, again, what if the sales price was 400,000? You'd have the first 200 would be 5%. The next 200 would be 3%. And that's it, right? I've accounted for all 400. That's what I'm doing. I'm accounting for the $900,000 by looking at the first 200, the next 200, and then whatever's left.
So all of your things need to add up, Julie. All of those things essentially need to add up.
All those tiers need to add up too, because it all starts here. It all starts with the $900,000. Did I hear another question?
Well, I know this is an example, right? There's no way in the world commercial real estate could be earning less commission than residential, right? $21,000 on a $900,000 property seems a bit low.
And this is just an example.
Yeah.
Questions? Comments, concerns?
Okay, I got one more, Julie, and I'm done.
Please.
So I found myself when I'm reading the question that I am confusing myself when it comes down to the selling and listing. So I know that's kind of like going back, but the selling agent is the person purchasing the property.
Correct. The selling agent is the one helping the buyer. They're selling the property to the buyer. So the buyer is working with the selling agent and the selling firm. The seller is working with the listing agent and the listing firm. So it's not on our buyer's agency agreement. It is on our offer to purchase and contract. So we'll see that. We'll see this verbiage when we look at our offer to purchase and contract. The selling firm, the listing firm. You're either listing the property for the seller or you're selling it to the buyer. Or both.
Julie, it's crazy. I literally wrote that down like before, and I gotta practice.
Write it down again and again and again. It's about repetition. When it comes to the math, it's about the practice. Repetition, writing things over and over. Did anybody else ever get trouble in school and have to go to the blackboard? I just showed my age, or the whiteboard, and had to write, "I will not talk in class" 100 times. I can't be the only one that had to do that. Come on, where you at? I know you're out there. Had to write it 100 times. I won't do this. I won't throw spit wads, or I won't talk. Why do they think they made you do that? Because if you write, "I will not talk in class" 100 times, the next time you go to talk in class, you should have that drilled into your mind, right? It was a punishment, sure. But the reason they had you do that was that repetition. If you wrote it 100 times, the next time you tried to talk in class or throw a spit wad, you'd probably think twice about it because you just stood there and wrote it 100 times. There's something to be said for repetition. And that's where I think if you write it again and then write it again, oh, go ahead and write it again. You know, this is why I'm such a big fan of flashcards. Guys, it's really easy to look at your notes. It's right there in front of you. But if you use a flashcard, you have to force yourself to turn it over. So this might be a good candidate. If this terminology is tripping you up, then this might be a good candidate for a flashcard.
Hey, Julie.
Yeah.
Could we go back to the PowerPoint to say calculating commission?
Mm-hmm. The graduated commission?
No, the one before that.
Okay.
Yes, this one here.
Mm-hmm,
and right there we say the 7%.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, how would I have known to divide and put 4 on one side and 3 on the other instead of the whole 7?
Mm-hmm. So the 7, going back, look at our commission tree. The 7 is the total commission. Yes, that's what the problem tells us. The total commission, guys, remember, the seller pays the listing firm. The listing firm shares their commission with the selling firm. They share their commission with whomever brings the buyer. So the total commission, the firm expects to collect 7%. And then we're going to share, we're going to divvy that 7% up between the sides. So the total commission collected is 7%. The listing firm has agreed they will cooperate by sharing the buyer, whoever brings the buyer, with 3%. So if the selling side is getting 3%, then that means the listing side is getting they're getting whatever's left, which is 4. 7 minus 3. So now we have a split of 4% for the listing side. So we took the 7% total commission and we divvied it. It's not always a 50-50. In this case, the listing side's getting 4%, the selling side is getting 3%.
Okay, but so how could I not got that turned around and put the 3% to the listing and 4% to the selling?
because they're going to cooperate with the firm that brings the buyer by offering them 3%.
Okay.
So the firm that brings the buyer is the selling firm. So if I give you 3%, what do I have left?
Okay, I get that part.
Okay. Yep.
I get that part. But I was
But
just trying to figure.
the listing firm has agreed that they will cooperate with the firm that brings the buyer by offering them 3%.
Okay.
Is that good?
Yes, it is. And thank you.
Sure, sure. Diane?
Okay. I just don't do math. I don't like math. Okay, so I got it wrong because I knew to divide it between the 4 and the 3, but I gave myself an extra step. I took the 7% out of the 285 and I got 19 something. And then I took the 3 and the 4% from that 19. Will I never, ever, ever do that? Because
there may be times when you do, and this is why we were saying earlier that all of these are different. In this case, it told me the total sales price. It told me the total commission, right? The only way for me to divide the sales price would be if it told me like it was a 40-60 split between the sides. But in this case, it's not a 40-60 split between the sides. They're given 3% to the selling side. They're keeping 4% to themselves. So you did do an extra step, but I think that can be corrected with practice and seeing these problems. Like, for example, let me see if I can't find one like super quick. I know I'm watching our time too. So hang on, we may have to stay on for a second. Page 251, super duper quick. Number 30, forget about the MLS stuff for right now, but do you see the listing broker? Shoot, that's not good. Yeah, listing broker got 40%. No, that's not good. I'll have to find a good one, Diane. Let me find a good one. So we'll come back to that tomorrow, but I'll find a good one. I know what you were trying to do, but it's in this case, it's 7% of the sales price, which is the total commission. The split is 3%. What does the problem say? 3% of the total sales price. So remember our terminology, 3% of the total sales price. That's how we know. And I know exactly what you're talking about. And I promise you, I'll find one for tomorrow night. So we'll start with that tomorrow night so we can see that as well. Okay. Yes. I got to let you guys go. I apologize. Hang on one second. I got a video link for you guys. If you want to stay and ask questions, I'm here. So hang on. I got it pulled up. So all I got to do is copy and paste. This is the video for measuring. So if you want to watch it, you can grab it. I think they do a good job. So if you want to learn more about measuring, there it is. It's 8:30. I'm still within my time. So you guys have a good night. If you want to stay around for questions, I'm here. We'll pick back up here tomorrow night. I'll see everybody tomorrow.
Are we having a study group anytime by chance, since we went over math?